Hi, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Thanks for streaming with us. A jury of 12 people will soon decide the fate of Sean Combs. Closing arguments are set to begin tomorrow. This will be the last chance for attorneys from both sides to speak directly to the jurors before they begin deliberations to decide if Combs is guilty or innocent. He's facing 5 charges: racketeering, conspiracy, 2 counts of sex trafficking, and 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. Combs has pleaded not guilty to all of these charges. Ahead of these closing arguments, attorneys meeting in court today for a charging conference with the judge. Prosecutors abandoning multiple allegations against the music mogul, including attempted kidnapping and attempted arson as underlying crimes in the alleged racketeering conspiracy charge. Now, prosecutors have given jurors 10 possible predicate acts to find Combs guilty of racketeering conspiracy. To convict, they must unanimously agree on 2 of these so-called predicate acts. Now, later in the show, looking at Combs' past, we'll take a look at the music mogul's legal track record throughout the years. But we begin with ABC News Chief Investigative Correspondent Aaron Katersky. Aaron's been in the courtroom throughout this trial. He joins us now live outside the Manhattan courthouse. And Aaron, let's start with that letter that was submitted by the federal prosecutors about the racketeering conspiracy charge. What did they write to the judge?
It's probably the most complicated charge that Sean Combs is facing, and it's an elaborate scheme that the jury will have to go through to figure out if they're going to convict Combs. And so what federal prosecutors did in a letter to the judge, and what they're doing still in the charging conference now, Eva, is pruning their case a little bit to make it as simple and direct as possible for the jury. They have plenty of ways they could convict Sean Combs. The federal prosecutors are just picking out a couple of pieces in order to perhaps simplify it so they don't get bogged down.
And the prosecution laid out some options for deciding on this racketeering conspiracy charge. Walk us through the different paths that they've given the jury here.
So there are 10 so-called predicate acts. The jury would have to unanimously agree that Combs and others conspired to commit 2 of them in order to find Combs guilty of racketeering conspiracy. That could be kidnapping involving his former assistant Capricorn Clark. It could be arson involving Kid Cudi and his Porsche. It could be forced labor involving his former assistant who testified under the pseudonym Mia. It could be obstruction and the attempt to buy off Mia, as alleged when one of Combs's bodyguards offered to send her a little something, ostensibly to keep her mouth shut about what she had witnessed Combs do, the violence that she said she had witnessed against Combs's ex-girlfriend. So the prosecutors still have plenty of options. They've taken out a couple of those: attempted kidnapping, attempted arson, attempted obstruction, just to make the instructions a little simpler for the jury.
Now, I know the jury wasn't in court today. What happened in the courtroom?
They're going through line by line each page of the instructions that the judge will read to the jury, because how the law is interpreted is really going to be up to the judge to explain. And neither prosecutors nor defense attorneys, Eva, want to give an inch. So they are telling the judge, we object to this sentence or this clause or this phrase, because they want to make it not only clear to the jury, but also perhaps favorable to their case. So the judge is making instantaneous rulings. The charge could be about 100 pages long. They're on about page 30 when I left the courtroom to come out to talk to you. So it's going to be a long process.
Oh, goodness. What's expected in these closing arguments?
Well, this is when prosecutors and defense attorneys get to summarize the case the way they see it. And I think, Eva, for prosecutors, they've laid out a rather disjointed presentation. There was Cassie here, Jane there, in between Kid Cudi and Mia, and escorts and some assistants. And this is their chance to tell the jury how they believe it all ties together to show that Sean Combs coerced women into these sexual marathon performances with male escorts and used his employees, his bodyguards, his assistants to help him set up all these encounters and to conceal them from the public. it will be their clearest opportunity to lay it out for the jury in a way they can understand. And for the defense, it's to say that's not how this went, that these women were willing participants, not coerced participants, and that Sean Combs did not run the kind of sprawling criminal conspiracy as alleged.
Aaron Katersky, as always, thank you so much. Let's break down what this all means for the case with ABC News legal contributor and trial attorney Brian Buckmeyer. Okay, we have to talk about this racketeering charge because I think, Aaron mentioned it's very complicated and it feels even more complicated after what we've learned today. So sort of walk us through this.
So let me see if I can try to simplify it because a lot of people are reporting about the charges they took off. These are some of the underlying predicate acts. We're talking about attempted arson, attempted kidnapping, and aiding and abetting sex trafficking. That doesn't mean they're not going to talk about the arson when it comes to Kid Cudi. It doesn't mean they're not going to talk about the kidnapping when it comes to Capricorn Clark. It's simply that, do you believe it happened or not? There's no, did he attempt to commit the arson? Did he attempt to do the kidnapping? It's a yes or no question, nothing about attempt. And it's because Judge Supermanian asked them to streamline this case for the jury because it was so complicated. Now, when it comes to racketeering conspiracy, it's about two predicate acts plus the criminal enterprise. But this is the thing that I think that a lot of people don't understand yet. Do you believe it's bribery and arson? Do I believe it's sex trafficking and forced labor? Well, so long as we both agree that it's a criminal enterprise, Sean Combs can be convicted of that. We don't have to agree to the same predicate acts, and that's how it's going to work in this case.
So each of the jurors could have two predicate acts that they believe. They don't have to all unanimously agree on the same two.
Yes.
Okay, so what does this mean as far as sentencing goes?
So when it comes to sentencing, we have 5 charges, 3 unique ones. The racketeering conspiracy, we're talking about a minimum of 15 years to life. That's the big one, right? Sex trafficking, because he's accused of sex trafficking someone who is not a minor, meant a maximum of 20 years each, and transportation to engage in prostitution. That is associated with the sex trafficking, 1 count for Jane, 1 count for Cassie. And with the sex trafficking, there's an either or there. You could be talking about the transportation to engage in prostitution as to Cassie or Jane, or to any one of the number of sex workers that are accused of going to Atlanta, to New York, to LA, to New York, to wherever it may have been, so long as they're crossing state lines.
Okay, so whenever the jury comes to their decision, whatever that decision will be, they're going to fill out a verdict sheet. Walk us through what a verdict sheet is and what they're going to have to do here.
So right now, we don't have a final verdict sheet, as Aaron talked about. That's one of the things that they're trying to hammer out. But we've seen 2 different proposed versions. And the way that the government has done it, it's probably the more interesting one. It starts off with count 1. Do you believe that Sean Combs committed the act of count 1, that racketeering conspiracy? And if you do, then they start walking you down and they say, any one of A through K, so 11 different variations of, do you believe that it was this predicate act or this predicate act or this predicate act? And K is very interesting because it talks about sex trafficking and asks specifically, do you believe it was Cassie who was sex trafficked or Jane that was sex trafficked? And then for the final 4 counts, it's just a simple matter of yes or no. Do you believe that Sean Combs is yes, guilty of this being sex trafficking, or no, not guilty of it? And then walking through the rest. It'll be very simple like that.
Okay. Now, the judge has said that he is waiting to make a decision on Combs's request to toss this case. Is this normal? Does this mean something? So
this Rule 29 motion for a judgment of acquittal happens after the government has presented their case, and the defense makes the argument that even in the light most favorable to the prosecution hasn't made out their case. And it's very normal for a judge to observe this because a big tenet of the criminal justice system is to be judged by a jury of your peers. And so the judge will see whether or not the jury has come to an even higher bar of finding Combs guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they do, there's no issue as to this Rule 29, and he'll go forward. He's just holding it off to let the jury decide, not him.
All right, Brian Buckmeyer, thank you so much for breaking that all down for us today. Now, Sean Combs has pleaded not guilty to all of the charges that he's facing. He's looking at a potential life sentence if convicted on all counts, but prison might not be the only thing Diddy has to worry about if the jury doesn't rule in his favor. The government might try to seize some of Combs's assets as well. And joining me now is someone who can help us understand all of this. Stephen Kessler is an attorney based outside of New York City. He's lectured about forfeiture across the country. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I know you've read the indictment against Sean Combs. If convicted, what does he stand to lose here?
Thank you for having me, Eva. He stands to lose a lot, but I have to go back to what Brian said. It depends on the charge or charges for which he is convicted. So if he is convicted on the indictment, then forfeiture is broken into 2 primary categories. The government can seek the proceeds of the criminal activity, and the government can seek the instrumentalities of the criminal activity. So proceeds are easy, right? So typically we have a situation of a bank robbery, and the proceeds of the crime are the cash that was taken out of the bank. It doesn't seem like there's much of a proceeds argument here, but there could very well be pieces that I'm not completely up to speed on. But the more likely in this situation, and when you come to RICO, and that's why I think RICO has been charged, when you come to RICO, you get a situation where the government is going after the instrumentalities of the crime. And here, to prove the instrumentalities of the crime, the government will have to show that certain assets were used to assist in the commission of the crime. And that is a very broad thing to show. The government can show that they were his homes, that they were his planes, that they're cars to use to transport the girls over state lines. All of that, in addition to assets themselves, would be subject to forfeiture. And one last thing here is that if the government can't track any of those assets, which I don't think will be an issue in this case, but if they can't, they can also get a forfeiture money judgment, which totals the amount that all of those assets combine to equal.
I'm curious, is there anything that Combs can do to prevent his assets from being seized?
That he hasn't already done as far as defending himself in the case? Yes. Forfeiture is part of the sentencing. So if and when there is a conviction in this case, then we deal with the issues of forfeiture, and the defense is entitled to a hearing. It is like a mini trial. The defense is entitled to present witnesses, to have discovery, you are in front of the same judge, but you can present your own case as far as the assets are concerned.
Stephen Kessler, thank you so much for joining us and for explaining that all. The jury will soon get the case in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Our legal experts will break down the strongest and weakest moments from this trial when we return. Welcome back. Ahead of tomorrow's closing arguments in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, we are taking a look at what may have been the strongest and weakest moments after more than a month of testimony. Brian Buckmeyer is back with us as the defense, Bernardo Villalona analyzing the prosecution. Bernardo, we're going to start with you because we can't stop talking about this racketeering conspiracy charge because I do think it's really confusing. Prosecutors today streamlining that part of the case there and the charges that will be given to the jury, these predicate acts, they sort of get to choose their own adventure of sorts. Could you please explain this to us as well?
Yes, so under racketeering conspiracy, there are numerous predicate acts. I believe you count them, and I believe there's 11 predicate acts. So the prosecution only has to prove 2 of those predicate acts. Now, the jury does have to agree that it's been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. There's no other option. But they can choose which predicate acts that has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. And they don't have to be in consensus as to it can be more than 2.
Do you think streamlining it makes it easier? Was that a strategy with the jury?
Yeah, so definitely it's something that happens normally in every case. I mean, when I was a prosecutor, I used to streamline the charges as well. And here, when they're talking about streamlining the charges, they're just taking the acts in terms of saying, is it an attempted arson? Is it an attempted kidnapping? Here, there's no issue about it. There was an arson. There was a kidnapping. It was actually fulfilled. So I think it would have been repetitive and a bit confusing to include that in the jury instructions, and also unnecessary time that the judge would have been taken to add those information in terms of instructions on what is attempted and what does it mean to come dangerously close to completing the act, when here it's like it either happened or it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Brian, strongest moment.
I think for the strongest moment that we're seeing here is how the defense is getting them to narrow in and zero in on what the issue is. I think for the most part, they're going to make arguments about the predicate acts, but I think they're really going to focus on whether or not this was a racketeering conspiracy, whether or not there was a meeting of the mind. And I think Alexandra Shapiro's arguments were probably the best and strongest preview of what those arguments were, in the sense of, if this is supposed to be a conspiracy with Sean Combs in this inner circle, and we kept hearing about KK, Christina Coram, or D-Rock, but there were instances where these people were not on the same page. It seemed almost like they were in completely different enterprises altogether. Then how could that be the meeting of the mind? How can that be the agreement? Because I think for the most part, Bernardo makes strong arguments in terms of the arson and the kidnapping and the bribery. And I think if you can just say, you know what, yeah, those probably happened, but these are separate individual criminal acts, not connected by one. I think that's the heart of their case, and I think they do have some decent arguments there that at least one or two people are cling on to.
So the problem with that is that the judges actually the prosecution before we left court today was fighting for the judge to give an instruction and to say that all the parties within the conspiracy does not have to know each and every detail of every crime. So if that is the instruction the judge does give to this jury, then it makes it easier for the government to actually argue that there was a criminal conspiracy, that there was an actual agreement.
She's always got something coming back.
Yeah, no. But they actually have to know that enterprise exists. And so, yeah, they don't know about the arson, they don't know about this, but is there actually a meeting of the mind that we are all trafficking these women? We're all concealing the crimes to do so. That still is at the heart of the case.
Bernardo's strongest moment for the prosecution?
Ooh, I'm going to have to go back to that Intercontinental Hotel video. And the reason I go back to that is that we have to be all brutally honest. We would not be here today if that video was not shown to the world. We were not. I think with the filing of the lawsuit, yes, it opened the eyes to the Southern District, and they started doing some poking around and doing the interviews and stuff. But it wasn't until that video dropped that it's like the Southern District was like, we need to do something. And aside from that, it was huge corroboration. So it's no longer a he say, she say, it's a money grab. This puts everything into a different light. That one, there was abuse. Two, there was a freak off that was happening that day. Three, that there was a male escort that was there. Four, that Sean Combs actually did bribe the security guard in order to get that footage and paid $100,000 and showed the means that he was willing to go in order to get what he wants, including the testimony of going to like the friend's house and trying to grab her and the multiple calls. And you had the physical, you saw the injuries on her face and how Cassie never fought back. And that is crucial and a strong piece of evidence because you have her just taking the hits. And this is something that now every time that she stated that she was abused or felt that she was scared, you have the fallback of looking at this video and say, it happened.
Okay, we don't have a lot of time, but really quickly, weakest moment for both sides.
Oof.
You want to start?
No, I think it was calling Bonner to the stand. I would say for the prosecution,
Jane?
Well, Bonner was even worse, I think.
Sure.
Bonner was even worse. Bonner on the stand because she just came off as so incredible. And I'm talking for the prosecution too, that she was not credible. And also that she was caught in that aha moment that didn't happen because Sean Combs was not even there. And it wasn't even worth the juice.
There were two moments, I think, both metaphorically and actually sometimes physically, the defense put their hands in their face in their hands, sorry. And it was one, the stylist said, yeah, I did commit crimes on behest of Sean Combs. And then again, when AUSA Comey came up after Tenny Garagos had said, well, Sean Combs reimbursed the enterprise for the travel of these people and say, well, didn't she just admit to transportation to engage in prostitution for Sean Combs actually paying for these things? Those were low moments in the defense's case.
Well, thank you both for being here with us today. Coming up, Sean Diddy Combs, no stranger to legal trouble. We'll take a look at the music mogul's legal track record. That's next. Welcome back. Sean Diddy Combs has garnered the national spotlight amid his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, but the music mogul is no stranger to making headlines over legal troubles. From a shootout inside a New York nightclub to a deadly stampede, Combs has a legal past. To look at it all, we have senior culture reporter for ESPN's Andscape, Justin Tinsley, and back with us again, ABC News legal contributor Brian Buckmeyer. Justin, let's start with you. And that deadly stampede in 1991 at a college basketball games that Combs promoted. Tell us about this.
So this was a charity basketball game that was promoted, as you said, by Combs and the late Heavy D. It was a couple of days after Christmas in 1991. It was widely publicized around Harlem. Celebrities like Run DMC, Jodeci sat courtside. So as you can imagine, the event was over capacity, and this led to a stampede and 9 people dying. The press in New York blasted Combs. This was really his first introduction to the big New York press circuit, and reportedly he went on suicide watch due to the stress of the event.
Brian, what were the legal ramifications here?
So there were no criminal legal ramifications here for Sean Combs, but there were some civil lawsuits that were settled after the fact. We don't have all the details in terms of how much he ended up paying overall, but you would imagine that this would be a multi-million-dollar settlement between the different individuals and the estates. As Justin said, 9 individuals or 9 people were killed. Their estates would have sued on their behalf and anyone else who was injured as well.
Okay, Justin, we also have to talk about that shooting at a Manhattan nightclub in 1999. This one made a lot of headlines at the time.
Yeah, so by the turn of the century, the biggest artist on Bad Boy Records was Shine. And if you remember this event in particular, this was the night that Bad Boy's entourage went to Club New York, led by Diddy, his girlfriend at the time, Jennifer Lopez, and Shine. And I'm sure Brian will get into the particulars, but there was an argument in the club and bullets started flying. And ultimately, Shine served the better part of a decade in prison. Meanwhile, Diddy was acquitted of his charges.
Yeah, Brian, what happened here legally for Diddy?
So Sean Combs was initially charged with the crime of discharging a firearm in that nightclub. There were allegations that even after he had driven off with Jennifer Lopez, that a gun was found within that vehicle. So also possession as well. Those are some serious allegations and charges. But ultimately, as Justin pointed out, it was Shine who was convicted of a crime and Sean Combs was acquitted. But to kind of tie the knot here, though, although he's acquitted of that charge, since we're talking about his federal case, that could still come up if Sean Combs is convicted of this crime, even though he was acquitted of it, and it could go towards his sentencing guidelines, potentially increasing the minimums that he could face in prison.
That's interesting. Justin, in 1999, Combs was arrested after allegedly attacking a music executive. Walk us through this incident.
So this was the infamous attack on music executive Steve Stout. He was known for working with the rapper Nas, and Nas and Diddy had a hit in 1999, which was called "Hate Me Now." And in the video, Combs was nailed to a cross, a la Jesus Christ. Combs has a change of heart reportedly, and once that's taken out of the video, Stout basically tells him, no, we've already paid for it and we've already filmed it. And reportedly from there, Diddy and 2 of his bodyguards attacked Stout in his office.
Brian, did this go to trial?
No, so the allegations there stem from what's called an assault charge, right? And that would be a criminal offense. But ultimately, Sean Combs took a plea deal to harassment. Now, harassment is a violation, not a crime, would not give a person a criminal record. But that still, as his arrest or his rap sheet might show, is that he was initially arrested on a crime and was given a plea deal in some sense and was able to plead guilty to a lesser charge, that being the violation of a harassment.
All right, last question for you here, Justin. It doesn't seem like these legal troubles really affected his success. Do you think this is going to impact his legacy?
So it's funny you ask that, because there's always been this angel and devil-like duality with Combs. On one hand, he's the music mogul who's created classic music, created classic albums, given us classic moments in pop culture. But on the other hand, like, he's always been this guy where trouble has followed him, as this segment has showed. So when you look at this trial, when you look at this case, that's why it's so fascinating, because he's either going to for once be held accountable for his alleged actions, or once again he's going to find himself on the sunny side of a verdict, even if his image is forever tainted with the details and the proceedings of this trial.
Justin, Brian, thank you both so much for being here with us. And thank you for joining us. We'll have new episodes every day until the jury gets the case, weekdays at 5:30 p.m. Eastern and Pacific. For even more on the trial, follow our podcast, Bad Rap, The Case Against Diddy, hosted by our very own Brian Buckmeyer. In New York, I'm Eva Pilgrim. Have a good rest of your day.